In this video, we'll be installing a Tusk rear rack onto one of the Polaris RZR XP1000s. These steps will be exactly the same for both the RZR 2-seater XP1000 and the RZR 4-seater XP1000. The Tusk rear rack is a great addition to any side-by-side with multiple built-in benefits. The rack tremendously increases the luggage capacity of your machine with the bolt-on upper cargo rack, allowing you to easily carry a cooler, extra fuel, camping supplies, tools, and much more. It also gives you the option to carry a spare tire with the removable tire carrier for that much needed security when you're out on the trail. You also get an integrated rear bumper to further protect your machine with rigid mounting to the frame underneath and oversized clamps for the roll cage up top, giving your machine that complete look. So the first thing you want to do is make sure all the pieces and hardware are accounted for. You'll find a hardware list on the provided set of instructions. So now we can begin installation. We need to remove the control arm plate, and to do that we're going to want to lift the machine up to make disconnecting those control arms easier. Once you've safely supported the machine and you have all the weight off the rear tires, you'll want to move the shifter all the way back into high gear. Doing this is going to give us necessary clearance to remove the control arm bolts. So now we can start loosening each of those 4 bolts and removing each nut from the back side. We're using a 15mm socket and ratchet along with a 15mm end wrench for the back side. Once you've pulled all 4 nuts, carefully remove each bolt. Doing this will disconnect each control arm and allow you to pull that stock control arm plate, and this will not be reused. And the next step is to decide whether or not you want to run the spare tire carrier. This can be bolted on after the rack is installed on the machine, but if you know you're going to be carrying a spare tire, it's easier to install it now. So we'll go ahead and set it into place, making sure it's centered between the 2 uprights. Then secure it with the other clamp pieces and the M8 by 25mm Allen head bolts. Once you've got all 8 bolts into place, go ahead and tighten each of them down evenly. We're using a 6mm Allen head T-handle to do this. And the next step is to position the lower portion of the rack into place on the machine. Then you'll reinstall the stock bolts, reattaching each control arm into its stock location. The lower plate welded on the rack is going to take the place of the stock control arm plate. Once you have all 4 control arms attached with the bolts, thread the 4 stock nuts onto the back side, and then we're going to go ahead and get these bolts pretty snug because we're going to put the machine's weight back on the control arms before we tighten these bolts to manufacturer's spec. We're waiting to torque these bolts down to make attaching the arms a little easier. We'll be back to torque these a little later in the video. So now we can put the machine back on the ground, then move on to installing the 2 upright arms. And it's important to note that there is a left and right side to these, so make sure you're installing them correctly. We found it's easiest to have someone up in the machine to line up the top clamp and thread in each bolt. These clamps will use the M8 by 30mm Allen head bolts. Now with those 4 bolts in place, you can move down and attach both flanges using 3 M8 by 25mm bolts, each through a flat washer, through both flanges, and into M8 nylock nut. We just want to leave all these bolts loose for now, and then move on to installing the left arm. So just the same thing, line it up top, and then thread in each bolt. And again, these are the M8 by 30mm Allen heads. Once those are loosely installed, move down and install the 3 flange bolts. And again, we're going to leave these loose for now. And then we can move on to the cargo rack. Have your buddy help you hold it up in place, then install one of the 6 M10 by 30mm Allen head bolts through a flat washer, through one of the tabs on each arm, through the cargo rack, and then into an M10 nylock nut. Once you have all 6 of those bolts installed, the rack will be completely assembled. All we have left to do is go through and tighten up all the hardware. So we'll start at the bottom and work our way up. Tighten the 4 control arm bolts to factory spec, and then we'll move up to the flange connection and tighten those bolts. We're using a 6mm Allen head socket and ratchet with a 13mm end wrench to do this. After you tighten those 3 bolts from both sides, move up to the cargo rack bolts. For these we'll need an 8mm Allen head socket and ratchet, along with the 17mm end wrench. Tighten all 6 of those bolts, and then with the roll cage clamp still loose, it's important to make sure the rack is centered on the top roll bar. Adjust it if needed, then you can finish the install by tightening the 4 roll bar clamps on each side. Move the shifter back into park and you're ready to ride. If you have any questions about the Tusk rear rack or about any of the steps in this video, feel free to give us a call at 1-800-336-5437. Rocky Mountain ATV MC is the leader for parts and accessories for your side-by-side. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you out on the trail.